Hello there, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Ask Dr. Jack Show. I am Dr. Jack Belitz, chiropractor in Omaha, and
Hello, everybody. I'm Aaliyah, Dr. Jack's assistant.
together we make up the Dr. Jack Show 2.0. Okay, so today,
Okay, so something I like to do is I always like to see what each month awareness is. And so we're in March, and this month it is brain injury awareness.
and a lot of that came up from that big movie that was out a few years ago called Concussion, and a good thing too because people are a lot more aware of injuries and the potential. Sometimes think that we've swung the pendulum way too far the other way, because I see like these high school kids that have a fall and all of a sudden they have to go through a concussion protocol, which I mean they barely got hurt, but you know, I guess better safe than sorry.
That being said, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be this huge traumatic ordeal in order to cause problems in your body. I mean, you just had a friend not that long ago just whack her head getting into the car, and she was messed up for a little while from it and disorientated and stuff. So
That's true. That's true. All right. So, okay. So, let's talk a little bit about it. First of all, traumatic brain injury is just this huge umbrella of problems. The first one being what we call a concussion. And basically, it's resulting of a shaking, a sudden change of movement, basically. So whiplash, for instance. So you're in your car and you get into an accident, you go forward, your whole body's going forward because the car was going forward, and all of a sudden your seatbelt stops you, but it doesn't stop your head. So now your head's going forward even faster, and then it stops, and then of course, now your body goes back. So you've got two major sudden changes of movement that happen in a whiplash injury. All of that can really torque on that poor brain.
yeah, it can cause the brain to actually move within the skull. You know, it's not like this tight fit where the brain doesn't move at all. You know, imagine shaken baby syndrome, same sort of motion causing damage.
But that's the first one, is the concussion. The second one is called a contusion. And a contusion happens when there's so much force that the brain actually slams against the inside of the skull hard enough where you're going to break some blood vessels. This is something that you can see on radiology and stuff. And we used to think that was the big problem and what caused all the symptoms, but we are learning that isn't anymore. Or at least that's the new theory. They're saying that the new theory, okay, so you got this brain sitting up here, which is pretty solid, but it's attached to the spinal cord. So you got this big brain on this little spinal cord, and it's being torqued around. So when it does that, the midbrain, the connection between the brain and the spinal cord, can get torqued and twisted and be really not a good thing. And so, and that's where they believe is most of the cause of like the, you know, disorientation, the loss of balance, because all that is controlled by that midbrain. And so that they believe is where the main problem, not the fact that the brain has some bruising on it, but because of the torque that was a result of the brain getting the bruising. All right. So that's the second. Now the third one is a traumatic brain injury, is what happens when you actually break the skull, and there's actually a problem with something hitting the brain, which would also be a very traumatic injury. So like a bullet, or you know, if somebody had I don't know, an ice pick and did it. I mean,
We saw, so this was a horrible accident. I grew up in the country, and you know, the tractors that pick up bales of hay, they have like these sharp things. Yeah. Well, the guy was working on it, and it went right through the top of his head and came out the back, and he was alive, like sitting there with this thing through his brain, and alive and waking, you know,
functional
until they took it out.
Yeah, and that's usually the biggest problem, is once they take something like that out, that's where all the damage happens. And
avoid those.
The problem is you can't really leave it in there. So yeah, avoid any type of potential for having
into
that.
your head.
Yeah. So anyway, so those are the three types, and then there's also a mild, moderate, and severe, especially with regard to the concussion. So in the concussion, a mild is defined as when there's when the loss of consciousness is limited to a few seconds or less. In other words, you might not lose consciousness and still be considered to have a concussion. It used to be that unless you lost consciousness, you wouldn't be considered to have a concussion, but now they're saying that you could potentially have some issues. And then there's probably no evidence of the injury at that point on imaging studies. And so that's why the doctors focus more on, is the person disoriented? So that's the big sign. You know, if you see somebody having a major fall, I don't care if it's a football field or basketball, it doesn't have to be even that traumatic. I mean, you could have a fall on the ice. If they get up and they're a little disoriented, that would be a good sign, hey, there was some injury there. And that's something you really have to watch out for, because it can happen at any age. So that's a big important thing. Then the moderate is when the loss of consciousness lasts up to a few hours, or confusion can last up to a couple weeks. So I would have put that higher than mild or moderate, but that's where they probably. And then the problem is that the severe is when the disorientation or loss of consciousness or the complications can last anywhere from 6 months to forever. So yeah, I guess there is that thing there too. So yeah, now here's the thing, you know, concussions generally speaking aren't life-threatening, but that doesn't mean they're not going to impact your life. One concussion, I'm not freaking out about or anything like that. But when you have multiple concussions, now you got it. Now, and also remember that people have different levels as to which they're going to respond in a concussive force. So, for instance, if you've got a poor little kid on the football field who gets, 3 or 4 or 5 concussions, it might not take as much of an injury or impact for that kid to result in loss of consciousness or disorientation. And if that's the case, the football field or the basketball part is no place for that kid. Their brain is obviously more susceptible through, lack of ligament structure or, just whatever, they just can't take it. And by you or by them, subjecting themselves to that trauma over and over and over, it can lead to lifelong. And yeah, it does. It sucks because you want to go out and play with your friends, and if they can do it, why can't you? Well, that's the way it is in life. Everybody's got their own potentials. Why can't somebody be a concert violin player when they've been practicing their whole life, or why can't somebody play in the NBA when they've been practicing basketball their whole life? I mean, we just have our different levels of competency and abilities, and one of them is the chance of getting a concussion. So you got to be careful about that. Anyway, that's all I have.
Yeah, that about covers it.
So hope you
thanks
guys
for
learned
watching.
something. Send this to your friends, share it, like it. Please like it. We would love to have likes, and the more you like it, the more other people get to hear about it. So you have an awesome, happy, and healthy day, and
Stay healthy,
Omaha.
Omaha.